When diplomacy meets conscience, Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked through the crystal corridors of the Galactic Assembly Station, her footsteps echoing against walls that had witnessed 3 centuries of interstellar politics. The station orbited the neutral world of Concordia, a massive structure built by 12 different species working together. Today felt different, though. The usual hum of diplomatic chatter carried an edge of tension that made Elena's military instincts twitch. She had served as Earth's primary ambassador for 2 years now, ever since humanity earned its seat on the Galactic Council. The position required patience, something Elena had learned during her previous career as a strategic analyst for Earth's unified defense force. But patience had its limits, especially when innocent lives hung in the balance. Commander Marcus Chen fell into step beside her, his crisp uniform contrasting with Elena's flowing diplomatic robes. Behind them, Dr. Sarah Kim carried a data tablet filled with intelligence reports that would make any seasoned diplomat's blood run cold. The 3 humans represented Earth's voice in a galaxy that was slowly learning to take their young species seriously. The council chamber stretched out before them like an amphitheater designed by aliens for aliens. Floating platforms accommodated the gaseous ethereals, while deep pools held the aquatic cetaceans. Crystalline formations provided seating for the silicon-based crystallites, and standard gravity platforms served the dozen other species that made up the Galactic Council. Elena took her place in the modest human section, a small platform that reflected humanity's junior status in galactic politics. Around her, representatives from worlds with histories spanning millennia prepared for another day of careful political maneuvering. She watched them with the analytical eye of someone trained to read body language across species barriers. Prime Minister Kilari of the Cetacean Republic floated in her specialized environment suit, her dolphin-like features betraying no emotion as she reviewed economic reports. The crystallites hummed among themselves in harmonics that human ears could barely detect. Everything seemed routine until Counselor Zethkri of the Saurian Confederation requested emergency speaking privileges. Zethkri stood 7 feet tall, his reptilian features marked by scars that spoke of recent violence. His usually pristine ceremonial scales were dulled with grief, and his golden eyes held a desperation that Elena recognized from her military days. This was not a politician seeking advantage. This was a leader watching his people die. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Zethkri began, his voice carrying the electronic translation that made interspecies communication possible. I come before you today not as a diplomat, but as a voice for the voiceless. My people are being systematically exterminated by the Hive Collective, and we need immediate intervention. The holographic displays around the chamber lit up with images that made Elena's stomach turn. Saurian cities burning under swarms of insectoid attackers. Refugee camps overwhelmed with families torn apart by war. Children separated from parents, loaded onto Hive transport vessels for purposes that intelligence reports suggested were too horrific to speak aloud. General Vorthak of the Hive Collective rose from his platform, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber's lights. When he spoke, his mandibles clicked in rhythm with his words, creating a sound that sent shivers down Elena's spine. The Hive Collective has acted within established territorial rights. The Saurian systems fell within our expansion zone, clearly marked in the Galactic Treaty of Boundaries. We have followed all protocols. Protocols. Zethkri's voice cracked with emotion. Your forces have destroyed hospitals and schools. You have taken our children. This is not territorial expansion. This is genocide. Elena felt Marcus tense beside her, his hand unconsciously moving toward where his sidearm would be if humans were permitted weapons in the council chamber. Dr. Kim was taking notes, but Elena could see her colleague's hands shaking with anger. The debate that followed was everything Elena had learned to expect from galactic politics and everything she had come to despise. The ethereals spoke of maintaining balance and avoiding interference in natural evolutionary processes. The crystallites cited economic disruption if trade routes were affected by military action. The avian hierarchy worried about setting precedents that might affect their own border disputes. One by one, The galaxy's great powers found reasons to do nothing. They spoke of procedures and protocols, of economic impacts and political ramifications. They discussed everything except the moral imperative to stop innocent people from being murdered. Elena watched Zethkri's hope fade with each speaker who chose neutrality over action. She had seen that look before, during humanity's own dark periods when good people stood by while evil flourished. It was the look of someone learning that justice was not a universal concept, that mercy was not a shared value among the stars. Prime Minister Kileri spoke for the Cetacean Republic, her melodic voice carrying across the chamber. While we sympathize with the Saurian position, the Republic cannot commit to military action without clear evidence that our own interests are threatened. The maintenance of galactic stability must take precedence over regional conflicts. More excuses followed. The robotic consensus cited insufficient data to make optimal decisions. The fungal networks claimed they needed time to reach consensus among their distributed consciousness. The crystallites hummed about economic projections and resource allocation inefficiencies. Elena found herself thinking about Earth's history, about the moments when her species had faced similar choices. She remembered studying the accounts of ordinary people who chose to hide refugees, to resist oppression, to stand up when standing up meant risking everything. Those people had not worried about political ramifications or economic impacts. They had seen suffering and acted to stop it. Marcus leaned over to whisper in her ear, "Admiral Torres has our fleet on standby. Earth Command is waiting for your assessment of the situation." Elena nodded, knowing that back on Earth, military planners were probably running scenarios for exactly this moment. The formal debate was winding down when Elena made her decision. She stood up, something that protocol said she should not do without being recognized by the chamber's moderator. Conversation stopped as hundreds of alien eyes turned toward the human section. "I request speaking privileges," Elena announced, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. Humans rarely spoke during formal sessions, and never without following proper procedures. The moderator, an ancient crystallite named Harmony of Spheres, considered the request. "The human delegation has not been recognized. Protocol requires." "Protocol," Elena interrupted, stepping down from her platform toward the central speaking area, "is what we follow when we have the luxury of time. Genocide does not wait for proper procedures." She reached the center of the chamber, a position no human representative had ever occupied. The silence was complete, broken only by the environmental sounds of the various life support systems keeping different species alive in shared space. 3 years ago, humanity earned its place in this council through technological innovation and diplomatic achievement. We came here believing that joining galactic civilization meant joining a community committed to justice and peace. Today, I have learned that we were wrong. Elena activated her data tablet, and the chamber's displays lit up with information that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. Earth's intelligence networks had been busy during their 3 years of membership, quietly gathering data that painted a clear picture of galactic politics. The Hive Collective has systematically conquered 17 species in the past century. Each time, they followed the same pattern. Target species with smaller military forces, claim territorial rights based on ancient treaties, overwhelm resistance with superior numbers, then absorb the conquered populations for labor and resources. The information scrolled past images of extinct civilizations, species that had once sent their own representatives to councils like this one. Elena saw recognition in some faces, memory in others, and shame in a few. Each time, this council found reasons to avoid action. Each time, good beings chose political safety over moral courage. Today, you are making the same choice again, and the Saurian people will pay the price for your comfort. General Vorthak's mandibles clicked aggressively. "Human Elena, your species has existed in space for merely decades. You understand nothing of galactic realities. The strong survive, the weak serve. This is natural law." Elena turned to face the Hive General directly. "General Vorthak, humanity has existed in space for decades, But we have existed as a species for millennia. We have learned some hard lessons about what happens when good people do nothing in the face of evil. We have learned that natural law is not moral law, and that survival of the strong is not the same as survival of the right. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives who had spent the day making excuses. The United Earth Federation hereby declares our intention to provide military assistance to the Saurian Confederation in their fight against hive aggression. We invoke Article 7 of the Galactic Charter, which permits intervention in cases of documented genocide. The explosion of noise that followed was unlike anything Elena had ever heard. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages, their translation systems struggling to keep up with the chaos. Some voices carried outrage, others shock, and a few carried what might have been approval. Marcus was at her side in seconds, his training taking over as various aliens gestured threateningly toward the human section. Dr. Kim had activated emergency communications with Earth, sending word that humanity had just committed itself to its first interstellar war. General Vorthak's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The human species has just declared war on the Hive Collective. We accept this challenge. Your 4 colonies and single homeworld will fall within a standard galactic year. Elena smiled, and somehow that expression contained more menace than all of Vorthak's threats. General, you have studied our public records and our official capabilities. You know about our colonies and our declared military assets, but you have never fought humans, and you do not understand what that means. She activated her communicator, speaking in clear English that the translation systems carried to every corner of the chamber. Admiral Torres, this is Ambassador Vasquez. Authorization code Omega 77. Execute Operation Righteous Fury. All Earth Fleet elements are authorized to provide immediate military support to Saurian forces. Zethkri collapsed to his knees, his reptilian features showing an emotion that transcended species barriers. For the first time in months, his people had hope. Elena looked around the chamber one final time, seeing fear in some faces, calculation in others, and something that might have been respect in a few. This council had the opportunity to do the right thing. You chose politics over principles. Humanity chooses differently. As she walked back toward the human section, delegates were already communicating frantically with their home governments. Some were probably calculating how this would affect their own positions, others were wondering which side would win, and a few were quietly asking themselves if they had chosen correctly. Marcus fell into step beside her, his military bearing evident as various aliens watched them with new intensity. Ma'am, Earth Command estimates we have 6 hours before the first hive response. Our fleet commanders are requesting tactical priorities. Belinda paused at the chamber exit, looking back at the scene of chaos she was leaving behind. Tell Admiral Torres that humanity is about to teach the galaxy a lesson about moral courage. And Commander, make sure our people understand that we are not just fighting for the Saurians. We are fighting for the idea that some things are worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. The corridors outside the chamber were already buzzing with activity as news of humanity's declaration spread throughout the station. Elena had just changed the course of galactic history with a simple choice between right and wrong. The war was beginning, and the galaxy was about to learn what humans could accomplish when they decided something needed to stop. Human warfare doctrine, unleash. Admiral Rebecca Torres stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching tactical displays that showed human fleet movements across 3 star systems. 6 hours had passed since Ambassador Vasquez's declaration, and the galaxy was already learning that humans approached warfare differently than any species they had encountered before. The Defiant led a battle group of 37 ships toward the Kepler system, where Saurian refugees were trapped on mining stations while Hive forces prepared for their final assault. Traditional galactic military doctrine called for massive fleets engaging in long-range battles, ships trading fire across thousands of kilometers until one side was destroyed or withdrew. Humans had studied galactic warfare for 3 years and reached a simple conclusion. Traditional doctrine was predictable, inefficient, and completely unprepared for an enemy that refused to follow established rules. "Admiral, we have visual contact with the Hive fleet," reported Captain James Wright from his position at the tactical station. 143 vessels in standard defensive formation. They are following Hive Battle Doctrine 7, spread formation with heavy units at the center. Torres smiled as she studied the enemy deployment. The Hive commander was probably feeling confident, facing a human force less than a third the size of his own fleet. Galactic military academies taught that numerical superiority was the primary factor in space combat. Human military academies taught that numerical superiority meant nothing if your enemy could not predict your actions. All ships, this is Admiral Torres. Execute Plan Mongoose. Remember, we are not just fighting for victory today. We are showing the galaxy that there is another way to fight. The human fleet did something that no galactic commander expected. Instead of forming a battle line to match the enemy formation, they scattered. Individual ships and small squadrons spread out in 3 dimensions, approaching the Hive fleet from dozens of different angles simultaneously. Commander Sarah Walsh watched from the bridge of the UES Wolverine as her ship dove toward the asteroid belt surrounding Kepler Prime. Behind her, the destroyers Rapid Fire and Storm Crow followed in loose formation, their crews preparing for combat maneuvers that would have been considered suicide by galactic standards. "Skipper, Hive formation is adjusting to track our approach vectors," reported her tactical officer. "They are splitting their heavy units to cover multiple threat axes." "Perfect," Walsh replied. "That is exactly what we want them to do. Navigation, take us into the asteroid field. Weapons, prepare close-range torpedo spreads." The Wolverine disappeared into the swirling rocks and debris that marked the outer edge of the system, followed by her escorts. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield as human ships used terrain and deception in ways that galactic military doctrine had never considered. Captain Maria Santos piloted the UES Ghost through the upper atmosphere of Kepler Prime itself, her ship's stealth systems masking its approach from Hive sensors focused on the space battle above. Behind her, a strike team of human Marines prepared for an operation that would have been considered impossible by any other species. "Captain, we have lock on the Hive command structure," reported her weapons officer. "The planetary bombardment systems are exactly where intelligence said they would be. Marines, prepare for combat drop. Remember, we need those systems intact. The refugee centers are depending on us stopping the bombardment, not destroying the weapons platforms." The Ghost opened its drop bay doors, releasing 24 Marines in powered armor suits designed for high-altitude insertion. They fell like shooting stars toward the planet's surface, their armor systems calculating optimal landing zones while automated systems prepared their weapons for combat. Above them, the main space battle was developing in ways that confused every Hive tactical computer. Human ships refused to engage in long-range duels, instead closing to distances that most species considered dangerously close. They used the gravitational fields of planets and asteroids to execute maneuvers that should have torn their ships apart. The UES Defiant led a squadron of heavy cruisers in a direct assault on the Hive fleet's center, but instead of trading fire with the enemy's strongest units, Torres ordered her ships to pass through the formation at maximum speed, launching torpedoes and fighter squadrons as they went. Hive defensive fire filled space with energy beams and projectile weapons, but the human ships were already somewhere else by the time the weapons reached their target coordinates. The Hive had trained to fight enemies that followed predictable patterns, not opponents who treated 3-dimensional space like a playground. "Admiral, Hive command ship is hailing us," reported the communications officer. "General Krethak is requesting to speak with you directly." Torres considered the request for a moment, then nodded. The main view screen lit up with the image of a Hive general whose mandibles clicked in patterns that suggested extreme agitation. "Human Admiral, your forces are fighting without honor. You refuse proper battle formations, you hide among rocks, and use terrain like cowards. This is not how civilized species conduct warfare." Torres laughed, a sound that carried clearly through the translation systems. "General Krethak, You are absolutely right. We are not fighting like civilized species. We are fighting like humans, and humans fight to win. She gestured toward the tactical displays, showing human forces systematically dismantling the hive formation. Your doctrine assumes that your enemies will be polite enough to stand still while you shoot at them. Your tactics rely on your opponents following rules that benefit your advantages. But humans learned warfare through necessity, not tradition. The Marine assault on the planetary bombardment systems was proceeding exactly as planned. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez led his team through the hive facility, using tactics developed in Earth's urban warfare training programs. The insectoid defenders were individually stronger and better armed, but they had never faced an enemy trained in small unit tactics and adaptive warfare. Demolition charges set on the main power couplings, Rodriguez reported through his helmet communicator. The bombardment systems will be offline in 60 seconds. Above him, Captain Santos was already moving the Ghost to its next target, a communications relay that coordinated hive fleet movements. The ship's artificial intelligence had identified 17 critical infrastructure points that could be neutralized by small teams rather than massive fleet actions. Back in space, the battle was reaching its climax as human tactical doctrine proved its effectiveness. The hive fleet, designed to fight enemies who stayed in formation and traded fire at long range, found itself constantly reacting to threats from unexpected directions. The UES Wolverine emerged from the asteroid field directly behind the hive flagship, its torpedo tubes loaded with warheads designed specifically to penetrate insectoid armor technology. Commander Walsh had spent the past 20 minutes using asteroids to mask her approach, something that hive tactical computers had not been programmed to anticipate. "Fire all tubes," Walsh ordered, and 6 antimatter torpedoes streaked toward their target at point-blank range. The hive flagship's defensive systems, designed to intercept threats from the front and sides, could not adjust quickly enough to stop an attack from directly astern. The torpedoes punched through the ship's armor and detonated inside its engineering sections, crippling the vessel in a single coordinated strike. Admiral Torres watched the tactical display as the hive formation began to collapse. Ships designed to operate as part of a coordinated fleet found themselves isolated and vulnerable when human forces disrupted their command and control systems. The numerical advantage that should have guaranteed hive victory became meaningless when their tactical coordination broke down. All human vessels. This is Admiral Torres. The enemy formation is breaking up. Pursue and disable rather than destroy when possible. We want prisoners and intelligence, not just wreckage. The final phase of the battle demonstrated another aspect of human warfare doctrine that the galaxy had never seen. Instead of pressing their advantage to completely annihilate the enemy, human forces focused on achieving strategic objectives with minimal destruction. They captured rather than killed, disabled rather than destroyed, and preserved infrastructure rather than eliminating it. General Krethak's image appeared on Torres' view screen again, but this time his mandibles showed the submissive patterns that indicated defeat. "Human Admiral, I request terms for surrender. Your forces have demonstrated tactical superiority." Torres nodded respectfully. "General, your request is accepted. However, the terms are not mine to set. You will surrender to Counselor Zethkri of the Saurian Confederation. This is their war and their victory." The aftermath of the Battle of Kepler demonstrated humanity's strategic thinking as clearly as the combat had shown their tactical innovation. Rather than claiming the victory for themselves, humans immediately transferred captured assets and prisoners to Saurian control, making it clear that they were allies rather than conquerors. Within hours, news of the human victory was spreading across the galaxy through communication networks that carried the battle footage to every civilized world. Species that had spent centuries accepting hive dominance watched human forces dismantle a superior enemy through innovation and courage. On the Galactic Assembly Station, Ambassador Elena Vasquez received reports from Admiral Torres while preparing for the emergency session that various delegates had demanded. The political landscape had changed as dramatically as the military situation. Prime Minister Kilari of the Cetacean Republic requested a private meeting, her earlier neutrality replaced by careful interest in human capabilities. The crystallites hummed among themselves in frequencies that suggested intense debate about revised strategic calculations. Even the ethereals had begun discussing concepts like moral obligation and ethical intervention. Commander Marcus Chen brought Elena the latest intelligence reports, showing how the victory at Kepler had triggered uprisings on 3 hive-occupied worlds. Species that had accepted conquest were suddenly fighting back, inspired by proof that the hive could be beaten. "Ma'am, the tactical recordings from the battle are causing quite a stir in galactic military circles," Marcus reported. "Several species have already requested exchanges of military observers. They want to understand how we fight." Elena nodded, understanding the implications. Humanity had not just won a battle. They had introduced an entirely new approach to warfare that made traditional galactic military doctrine obsolete. Every species would now have to reconsider their assumptions about power, strategy, and the nature of conflict itself. Dr. Sarah Kim joined them in Elena's temporary office, her tablet filled with diplomatic communications from across the galaxy. "Ambassador, we are receiving formal requests for military assistance from 6 different species currently under hive threat. The avian hierarchy wants to discuss a mutual defense treaty. Even the robotic consensus is asking about tactical data sharing agreements." Elena looked out through the station's viewports at the stars beyond, each one representing worlds where the news of human victory was changing political calculations and military planning. 3 days ago, humanity had been a junior member of galactic civilization. Today, they were its newest power broker. The transformation was exactly what Elena had hoped for when she made her declaration. Humanity had not entered the war to gain territory or resources. They had fought to prove that moral courage could triumph over political convenience, that innovation could overcome numerical superiority, and that some principles were worth defending regardless of the cost. The galaxy was learning that humans fought differently, not because they enjoyed war, but because they refused to accept that might made right. They had turned warfare from a contest of resources into a test of ideas, and their ideas had proven superior. As Elena prepared for the emergency council session, she knew that the real victory was not military but moral. The Hive Collective would continue to exist, but their aura of invincibility was broken. Other species would no longer assume that resistance was futile or that justice was impossible. Humanity had entered the galactic community quietly, earning their place through diplomacy and achievement. They had announced their true nature through action, showing the galaxy that some species still believed in fighting for principles rather than profit. The war was far from over, but its character had already changed forever. The galaxy now knew that when humans decided something needed to stop, they found ways to stop it that no one else had ever imagined. The age of human influence in galactic affairs had begun, built on the foundation of moral courage and tactical innovation that defined their species at its best.